Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy the story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The Grand Amphitheater of the Sovereign Fleet Academy was completely silent. Thousands of cadets from dozens of elite species stood at perfect military attention. At the center of the obsidian platform stood Commander Xylar of the Kalan race. He towered over the assembly, his crystalline armor reflecting the cold, artificial light of the orbital station. Xylar possessed a terrifying elegance, a predatory grace that matched his cold and calculating intellect. His piercing gaze swept across the crowd and locked onto a single, insignificant figure standing quietly in the third row, Cadet Amari Arias, the only human in the entire sector. "Cadet Arias!" Xylar's voice boomed, dripping with unrestrained contempt and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Step forward." Amari stepped out of the formation. She was small, severely lacking the chitinous plating of the Vorax, the optical camouflage of the Cillian, or the telepathic resonance of the Krell. She wore a standard-issue, gray fabric uniform and maintained a perfectly blank expression. Xylar paced around her slowly, ensuring every cadet in the vast hall could hear his brutal assessment. "Look closely at this fragile specimen," he commanded the room, his tone laced with venom. "The human biology is a cosmic joke. Thin skin that tears against the slightest friction, bones composed of brittle calcium, no natural venom, no sensory advantages. A pathetic reliance on a narrow band of atmospheric gases just to maintain simple consciousness. Your species lacks the fundamental killer instinct required to survive among the stars, let alone hold a command rank within this glorious fleet." A low ripple of cruel amusement echoed through the ranks of the towering alien cadets. Amari did not blink. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, her breathing steady and perfectly measured. "The final trial of the command track requires the tracking and elimination of a high-value target," Xylar continued, his tone turning exceedingly sinister. "However, given the unique frailties of your kind, I have personally designed a special deployment for you. You will be dropped into the heart of the Tartarus sector, straight into the rotting remains of the Black Nebula battlefield. It is an abandoned war zone, highly irradiated, and currently serving as the hunting ground for 3 apex leaders of the most dangerous predatory species in the known galaxy." Quiet gasps rippled through the immense hall. Even the most hardened alien warriors considered the Black Nebula an absolute death sentence. To face one apex leader was suicide. To be dropped into a confined zone with 3 was a blatant execution. Xylar was using the rigid rules of the Academy to legally murder the human anomaly. "You will be hunted by the Vorax King, a behemoth encased in unbreakable biological armor," Xylar taunted. "You will be stalked by the Cillian Shadow, an assassin that bends light to become complete nothingness. And you will face the Krell Broodmother, a psychic abomination capable of melting your mind from miles away. Your objective is simple: hunt down and eliminate all 3 apex targets. Prove that humanity has a right to exist in my fleet." He gestured to a nearby hovering drone. It floated forward, carrying only 2 meager items. The first was a biometric tracking collar, a heavy metallic ring designed to monitor vitals and broadcast coordinates. The second was a standard-issue energy blade, the most basic close combat weapon available, entirely lacking any advanced thermal shielding or kinetic dampeners. No plasma rifles, no stealth cloaks, no orbital bombardment support, Xylar decreed, smiling sharply. "You will wear this tracker so we can record the exact moment your pathetic heart stops. And you will take this blade. Accept the mission, or resign right now and crawl back to your mud planet." Amari Arias did not argue. She did not defend her species or point out the blatant injustice of the impossible trial. She reached out with steady hands, picked up the biometric collar, and locked it securely around her own neck. The heavy device hummed, digging slightly into her skin as it synchronized with her pulse. She then gripped the hilt of the basic energy blade and clipped it securely to her belt. "Mission accepted," Amari stated, her voice flat, cold, and utterly devoid of fear. Within less than 1 hour, she was sealed inside a heavily armored drop pod and fired violently into the churning abyss of the Black Nebula. The descent was incredibly chaotic. The small pod shook as it smashed through layers of dense, ionized gas and raging magnetic storms. For 20 minutes, Amari endured gravitational forces that would have snapped the spine of any normal being. The planet below was a nightmare landscape, a graveyard of shattered dreadnoughts and toxic oceans. The atmospheric pressure was crushing, thick with corrosive green dust and heavy lethal radiation. The drop pod slammed violently into the desolate surface, tearing a deep, burning trench through the metallic soil before screeching to a sudden halt. The heavy blast doors hissed open, immediately exposing the tight interior to the hostile environment. Thick and noxious fog instantly seeped into the cabin. Amari stepped out into the oppressive gravity. The air was incredibly heavy, smelling strongly of ozone and rotting biomatter. Her standard-issue survival suit immediately activated its internal air filtration system, whirring loudly as it attempted to scrub the severe toxins from the atmosphere. A flashing red light on her wrist warned her that the environmental radiation was currently spiking to lethal, flesh-melting levels. Without a single second of hesitation, Amari reached up to her neck and firmly pressed the manual override sequence on her suit. She deliberately disabled the oxygen supply and completely shut down the survival air filter. The loud whirring sound died instantly. The raw, unfiltered, and highly toxic atmosphere of the Black Nebula flooded her lungs. It burned like swallowing crushed glass. Her chest heaved violently. Her vision blurred at the edges, and her knees buckled for a fraction of a second. But she fiercely forced herself to stand upright. She focused deeply on her heart rate, using ancient human meditative techniques to forcibly slow her metabolism and demand her cellular structure to aggressively adapt to the radiation and the poison. If she relied on the mechanical filter, the apex predators would hear the compressor whining from miles away. To hunt the deadliest monsters in the dark, she had to become a silent part of the dark, millions of miles away, safe inside the pristine orbital command center. Xylar stood confidently before a massive holographic display. The tiny red dot representing Amari blinked steadily against the grim map of the dead planet. He watched the telemetry data feed actively streaming from her collar, noting the sudden, massive spike in atmospheric toxins entering her fragile bloodstream. He let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed across the command deck. "She turned off her filters," he announced loudly to his bridge crew, shaking his head in mock pity at the sheer stupidity of the human cadet. "Her lungs will liquefy into ash before the beasts even catch her scent. I give her less than 3 hours before the atmospheric pressure crushes her internal organs, or the predators tear her frail limbs apart. Prepare the failure broadcast, deep within the jagged metallic canyon of a destroyed dreadnought." The heavy, toxic air hung utterly stagnant. Amari moved with calculated precision through the maze of rusted bulkheads. She reached into her survival suit utility pouch and extracted a small packet of synthetic trauma blood, a standard inclusion in her basic medical kit. With a quick flick of her wrist, she slashed the pouch open using the unpowered hilt of her energy blade and began to systematically smear the thick crimson liquid against the sharp edges of the fractured hull plating. She left a highly concentrated, undeniable trail of scent that cut right through the foul atmospheric odors. The metallic tang of iron and artificial plasma was a dinner bell ringing out across the dead world. Less than 2 miles away, the ground violently began to tremble. The Vorax King had caught the scent. He was an absolute behemoth of biological warfare, a nightmare composed of pure muscle, rage, and a naturally evolved exoskeleton, far denser than any military-grade starship armor. Standing over 20 feet tall when fully reared back, his massive body was covered in thick, interlocking black plates capable of deflecting high-energy blasts and crushing solid titanium. He moved with a terrifying heavy speed, his 6 massive limbs tearing huge craters into the irradiated soil with every single step. For weeks, he had survived in this hellish wasteland by brutally slaughtering everything in his path. Now, his highly tuned olfactory receptors locked onto something entirely new. It was fresh. It was weak. It smelled like effortless prey. The beast let out a deafening roar that shattered the fragile silence of the toxic valley. Launching himself forward into a dead sprint, he crashed blindly through the rusted wreckage, tossing massive steel girders aside as if they were nothing but dried twigs. He followed the crimson trail directly into a wide, circular clearing, surrounded by towering walls of shattered engine thrusters. In the very center of this makeshift arena stood Amari. To the towering Vorax King, she looked impossibly frail, a tiny morsel of flesh waiting to be violently devoured. She had her back pressed against a humming hyperdrive core that had been stripped from a fallen cruiser. Her posture, seemingly frozen in absolute terror, clutching her arms tightly to her chest. But Amari was not frozen by fear. She was waiting. For the past 40 minutes, she had meticulously stripped the exposed plasma conduits and anti-gravity plating from the surrounding debris, hardwiring them directly into the ruptured hyperdrive core behind her. She had deliberately engineered a highly unstable, localized magnetic containment field, weaving the invisible trap precisely around the exact spot where she now stood. The Vorax race possessed biological armor, naturally rich in heavy metallic isotopes, an evolutionary adaptation that made them virtually indestructible in standard combat. Amari knew this biological fact perfectly well. She also knew that the fundamental laws of physics did not care about biological superiority. Seeing his pathetic prey huddled near the humming core, the Vorax King did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He pushed his massive back legs off the cracked ground, launching his enormous bulk through the dense air in a terrifying, calculated leap. His jaws opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of razor-sharp mandibles designed to snap a heavily armored soldier entirely in half. He fully intended to crush the human into red mist upon impact. Amari did not run. She did not even flinch. She simply watched the shadow of the falling behemoth eclipse the dim light of the nebula above, waiting for the precise millisecond when his immense mass crossed the invisible threshold of her makeshift snare. As the beast descended, Amari slammed her fist down onto the exposed manual ignition terminal of the hyperdrive core. The ancient machine screamed to life. The trap was sprung. In an instant, the ambient magnetic field of the clearing violently inverted. The immense electromagnetic force violently seized the heavy metallic isotopes laced throughout the Vorax King's indestructible armor. The beast was ripped from his downward trajectory, mid-air, and slammed mercilessly into the hard, metallic earth with the kinetic force of a falling meteor. The massive shockwave kicked up a blinding cloud of toxic green dust. The localized gravity within the field multiplied exponentially, acting entirely against the structural integrity of his own invincible shell. The Vorax King shrieked as his ultimate biological defense abruptly became his own inescapable torture chamber. The invincible black plating began to buckle, warp, and violently crack under the immense, crushing pressure. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of sheer magnetic force compressed his massive frame, pinning his 6 limbs to the ground so tightly that he could not twitch a single muscle. His proud, terrifying roar was abruptly reduced to a desperate, choking gargle as his dense armor dug deep into his own internal organs. Amari stepped out of the blinding magnetic glare, standing safely within the eye of the artificial storm, completely unaffected by the localized field. She walked slowly toward the immobilized monster, the radioactive dust swirling around her calm, emotionless face. She crouched down right beside the beast's massive, terrified eyes. She did not ignite her energy blade to deliver a swift killing blow. Instead, she produced a pressurized syringe from her medical kit. During her preparation, she had manually overridden the safety protocols of her suit's autodock to synthesize a highly concentrated, extremely lethal chemical compound. Without a single word, she drove the thick steel needle straight into a fresh, bleeding fissure in his cracked armored neck and firmly pushed the plunger down. The potent serum flooded directly into his immense cardiovascular system. It was not a poison designed to kill him. It was a neurological amplifier specifically engineered to magnify his active pain receptors by exactly 100 times. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The Vorax King convulsed violently against the crushing magnetic field, letting out a blood-curdling scream of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed for miles across the dead planet. Every single nerve ending in his massive body was set ablaze with unbearable torment. The pain was absolute, tearing through his primitive, dominant mind and entirely shattering his predatory pride. He was drowning in an inescapable ocean of suffering. Amari leaned in close, her voice a cold, sharp whisper, cutting effortlessly through his agonizing screams. "You can die right here, completely crushed by your own heavy armor and burning from the inside out," she stated flatly, locking her cold eyes with the weeping monster. "Or you can submit. You will serve me. You will hunt for me. Nod your head if you wish to live." The apex predator of the cosmos, the historically unstoppable king of the Vorax, looked up at the tiny human standing over him. He saw absolutely no mercy in her eyes, only a chilling, mechanical calculation that was far more terrifying than any orbital weapon he had ever faced. Broken, completely humiliated, and consumed by excruciating agony, the monstrous warlord ceased his pathetic struggling. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his massive horned head toward the dirt, forcing a trembling nod of absolute submission to the fragile creature he had so foolishly considered his next meal. The toxic fog of the black nebula grew denser as the jagged metallic canyons gave way to a rotting, petrified forest of alien flora. Here, the shadows did not merely obscure, they felt alive, suffocating and cold. High above in the twisted, dripping canopy of obsidian branches, something was moving. Or rather, the absence of something was moving. The Cillian shadow did not make a sound. It did not displace the heavy fog in any measurable way. As an apex assassin of the cosmos, its sleek, elongated body was covered in a specialized dermal layer that seamlessly bent ambient light waves around its physical form. It was a phantom, completely untraceable by thermal imaging, motion detectors, or the naked eye. The creature had tasted the sudden shift in the atmospheric currents. It had heard the distant, agonizing roar of the Vorax King suddenly cut short. Now, it was hunting the anomaly that had caused it, far above the toxic storm, safely entrenched in the orbital command center. Commander Xylar stared intensely at the massive holographic projection of the planet's surface. He leaned forward, resting his sharp chin on his armored hands. The telemetry data from Amari's biometric collar showed her moving steadily toward a deep, subterranean ravine. Xylar smiled, a slow, predatory curling of his lips. He knew exactly what territory she was blindly wandering into. He tapped a console, bringing up the most advanced sensor array the Kalan fleet possessed. Even their multi-spectrum scanners registered absolutely zero anomalies in the canopy above the human cadet. The Cillian was perfectly cloaked. "She survived the brute," Xylar muttered to his bridge officers, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "A lucky trap using scavenged junk. But you cannot trap what you cannot see. The Cillian is a ghost. It does not trigger tripwires. It does not boast or roar before it strikes. It will simply sever her brainstem, and she will be dead before her pathetic nervous system even registers the pain. Watch closely. The human anomaly ends in the shadows." Down in the suffocating gloom of the petrified forest, Amari knew she was being followed. She did not need electronic sensors. She felt the unnatural stillness in the heavy air, the way the toxic insects had suddenly stopped their erratic clicking. She was dragging a heavy, severed biological conduit she had carved directly from the subdued Vorax king. Thick, corrosive. Violet blood steadily dripped from the severed vein, leaving a highly pungent, incredibly obvious trail over the damp, glowing moss. It was an insultingly simple bait, yet entirely irresistible to an assassin driven by the primitive instinct to track wounded prey. Amari dragged the bleeding meat straight into the gaping maw of a massive subterranean cave system. The air inside the cavern was thick, humid, and entirely motionless. The walls and ceiling were heavily overgrown with dense clusters of indigenous bioluminescent fungi. These alien mushrooms constantly released millions of microscopic, glowing spores into the stagnant air. The spores drifted lazily, illuminating the pitch-black cavern with an eerie, shifting azure light. Amari walked deep into the glowing subterranean chamber, dropped the bloody Vorax bait directly in the center of the cavern floor, and then calmly walked into the deepest, darkest recess of the cave wall, letting the blackness swallow her whole. The Cillian assassin entered the cavern moments later. It moved with terrifying grace, its clawed feet making absolutely zero sound against the damp stone. It ignored the violet blood pooling on the floor, its highly advanced predatory instincts focused entirely on the corner where the human had retreated. The assassin prepared its biological venom stingers, extending them silently from its wrists. It anticipated an effortless kill. The human would be cowering in the dark, breathing heavily, completely blind to the executioner standing right in front of her. However, the Cillian made one fatal, physical miscalculation. It had evolved to perfectly bend light and silence its footsteps, but it still occupied physical space. It still possessed mass. As the invisible assassin stalked forward, its physical body passed directly through the dense, floating clouds of bioluminescent spores. The microscopic, sticky fungi were highly sensitive to any physical disturbance. The moment the Cillian displaced the stagnant air, thousands of glowing blue spores instantly clung to its light, bending dermal layer. The creature took another step, and tens of thousands more spores stuck perfectly to its elongated limbs and torso. In a matter of seconds, the absolute invisibility of the apex assassin was completely and violently compromised. The Cillian was no longer a ghost. It was a vividly glowing, bright, azure silhouette, perfectly outlined in the pitch-black cavern. The creature froze, its predatory mind struggling to process the sudden, catastrophic failure of its greatest evolutionary advantage. From the absolute darkness of the cavern wall, a brilliant hum of energy shattered the silence. The blinding violet plasma of an ignited energy blade cast sharp, aggressive shadows across the wet stone. Amari stepped out from the gloom. She moved with a terrifying, mechanical fluidity. Before the glowing silhouette of the Cillian could even react or raise its venomous claws, Amari closed the distance in a single, perfectly calculated stride. She thrust the humming energy blade upward, stopping the searing plasma exactly 1 millimeter away from the soft, pulsing venom gland, located directly under the assassin's jawline. It was the only unarmored, universally fatal pressure point on a Cillian's anatomy. The Cillian assassin froze entirely. But what terrified the creature was not the plasma blade burning mere inches from its throat. It was the sheer, impossible silence radiating from the human holding the weapon. The assassin possessed hypersensitive auditory receptors designed to hear a heartbeat through solid titanium. Yet, standing less than 2 feet away from the human, the Cillian heard absolutely nothing. There was no pulse. There was no rhythmic drawing of breath. There was no heat signature of panic. Through supreme biofeedback control and brutal meditative conditioning, Amari had artificially suppressed her internal heart rate and respiration down to near absolute zero. She had achieved a state of clinical suspended animation while remaining entirely conscious and lethal. The human had become more of a ghost than the shadow assassin itself. Looking into Amari's cold, dead eyes, the Cillian experienced a profound, alien sensation. It felt absolute, paralyzing horror. The predator realized it was entirely at the mercy of a creature that could control its own biology like a programmed machine. Slowly, the glowing silhouette raised its long, clawed hands in a universal gesture of total surrender. The assassin did not attempt to negotiate or strike. It simply yielded to a superior, utterly terrifying predator. Moving with calm, deliberate efficiency, Amari reached out with her free hand and swiftly uncoiled the highly toxic biological restraining vines wrapped around the Cillian's waist. Within minutes, the deadliest assassin in the known galaxy was tightly bound and gagged by its own lethal weaponry, trembling uncontrollably in the dark as the human stood over it, her breathing finally returning in slow, measured, triumphant rhythms. The ground beneath the toxic surface of the black nebula began to vibrate violently, not with the heavy, isolated footfalls of a solitary behemoth, but with the frantic, synchronized scuttling of tens of thousands of jagged limbs. The Krell swarm had arrived. They were a nightmare, made flesh. A horrifying amalgamation of insectoid exoskeleton and reptilian predatory instinct. Each drone stood as tall as a full-grown human, armed with 4 scythe-like appendages capable of shearing through reinforced starship bulkheads in a matter of seconds. But their terrifying physical threat was entirely secondary to their true weapon. The Krell operated under a singular, flawless hive mind. The broodmother controlled every twitch, every strike, and every strategic maneuver from miles away, possessing a telepathic capability so immensely powerful it could directly scramble the neural pathways of her enemies and liquefy their brains before they even saw the swarm. Amari stepped out of the bioluminescent cavern, completely unfazed by the encroaching doom. Behind her, securely tethered by the Cillian assassin's own indestructible venomous vines, she dragged the massive, groaning form of the crippled Vorax King and the terrified, tightly bound shadow assassin. She violently forced the 2 massive apex predators onto their knees in the center of a wide, ash-covered basin. The swarm poured over the jagged metallic ridges, like a living, breathing tide of clicking mandibles and razor-sharp chitin. They numbered in the hundreds of thousands, a seemingly infinite ocean of ravenous death completely encircling the human anomaly. The planet's natural defensive grid had sensed the violent shifting of the localized magnetic fields from the earlier battle and the massive biological distress signals, immediately awakening the dormant hive to aggressively eradicate the invasive threat. The broodmother remained perfectly hidden in a subterranean fortress miles beneath the crust, preparing to unleash a massive telepathic shockwave designed to instantly melt Amari's mind into useless gray matter. Amari completely ignored the screeching hordes rapidly closing the distance. She dropped to one knee beside her 2 captive warlords. From her utility pouch, she retrieved a handful of scavenged microprocessors, sensory nodes stripped from the hyperdrive core, and the raw, conductive wiring she had meticulously salvaged during her first hour on the planet. moving with the terrifying, sterile efficiency of a battlefield surgeon. She began to rapidly construct a crude but highly potent neural amplification rig. With ruthless precision, she jammed two exposed neural shunts directly into the primary cerebral cortexes located at the base of the Vorax King and the Cillian Shadow's skulls. Both alien leaders violently convulsed, their advanced nervous systems suddenly bridged together by the crude copper wiring. Amari then integrated the makeshift rig directly into the heavy biometric tracking collar, still locked tightly around her own neck. Hijacking the high-frequency transmission frequency meant to broadcast her vitals to Commander Xylar. The front line of the Krell swarm reached the edge of the basin, stopping exactly 100 yards away. The air grew impossibly thick as the invisible weight of the broodmother's psychic assault began to aggressively crush down on Amari's consciousness. It felt like a massive physical weight, pressing relentlessly against the inside of her skull, attempting to forcibly peel apart the layers of her sanity. A thin stream of dark blood began to steadily trickle from Amari's nose as the immense telepathic pressure threatened to tear her brainstem apart. She did not flinch. She manually activated the crude amplification device. The machine hummed to life, drawing raw power directly from her energy blade's reserve plasma cell. She forcefully bypassed the standard sensory inhibitors of the two captive predators, locking their minds into a state of hyper-lucid recall. She aggressively triggered their pain receptors and trauma centers simultaneously. She made the Vorax King acutely relive the exact millisecond his indestructible pride was crushed by an insurmountable magnetic force, artificially magnifying his absolute, weeping agony by a factor of 1,000. She forced the Cillian assassin to vividly re-experience the paralyzing, existential horror of being completely outmatched and hunted in the pitch black by a ghost completely lacking a heartbeat. She extracted the purest, most highly concentrated essence of their ultimate defeat, absolute humiliation and paralyzing terror. Then, utilizing the invasive telepathic bridge the broodmother had just foolishly established with her own mind to deliver the killing blow, Amari violently rerouted that massive tidal wave of pure psychological trauma straight back up the psychic connection. She weaponized their fear. She took the absolute dread of the galaxy's two most lethal solitary predators and blasted it directly into the highly sensitive, completely unprotected central neural hub of the Krell hive mind. The impact was utterly catastrophic. The broodmother, expecting to encounter the weak, fragile resistance of a pathetic human mind, was instead violently slammed by a thermonuclear explosion of concentrated alien agony. The sheer, impossible magnitude of the broadcasted terror instantly overloaded the Queen's highly evolved telepathic receptors. The psychic backlash was so severe, it physically manifested as a blinding flash of purple static energy aggressively rippling across the entire sky above the basin. The flawless, synchronized network of the Krell swarm shattered into millions of jagged, disconnected pieces in a single millisecond. The massive tide of terrifying creatures abruptly stopped their coordinated advance, violently cut off from the soothing, absolute control of the broodmother, and suddenly infected by the agonizing phantom pain of the Vorax and the blinding horror of the Cillian. The individual Krell soldiers violently lost their minds. Absolute chaos erupted, driven completely insane by the sudden influx of artificial trauma. The hundreds of thousands of drones turned on each other, razor-sharp mandibles that were explicitly meant for Amari furiously tore into the flesh of their own kin. Green blood sprayed heavily across the ashen soil as the drones frantically ripped off their own limbs and the limbs of their brothers in a desperate attempt to escape the invisible fire burning inside their heads. The basin was instantly transformed into a horrific, massive meat grinder of screeching, cannibalistic violence. The once unified ocean of ultimate predators was rapidly reducing itself to a writhing, pathetic pit of senseless death. Deep beneath the earth, The psychic shockwave utterly crippled the Krell broodmother. The massive, ancient queen suffered agonizing neural paralysis, her massive brain actively hemorrhaging under the unendurable weight of the injected terror. Above ground, the heavy metallic earth ruptured violently as the massive, grotesque form of the broodmother frantically breached the surface, unable to hide from the agonizing torture in the dark any longer. She dragged her massive, pulsating body through the horrific carnage of her own dying children, convulsing violently with every single movement. She collapsed heavily onto the ash-covered dirt, mere yards away from Amari's boots. The towering, previously horrifying queen of the endless hive pressed her enormous head hard against the ground, physically shaking in absolute, terrifying submission. Through the shattered, static-filled remains of her telepathic network, she projected a desperate, weeping plea directly into Amari's mind, begging the human to stop the horrific psychological torture and sparing what little was left of her shattered sanity. The purple static of the psychic shockwave slowly dissipated into the heavy, toxic atmosphere. The horrifying sea of dead Krell drones lay perfectly still. In the center of the gruesome battlefield stood Amari Arias, entirely untouched. Around her, the most lethal entities in the known galaxy slowly began to regain their cognitive functions. The Vorax King forced his massive, dented armor off the ground, his pain receptors finally dulling from the absolute sensory overload. The Cillian shadow wriggled free from the loosened venomous vines, its azure glowing spores dimming, but its humiliation burning intensely. The colossal Krell broodmother raised her trembling head from the ash. For the first time in the history of the Tartarus sector, these three ancient, mortal enemies looked at one another and realized a horrifying truth. They had not been bested by a superior physical force. They had been manipulated. The fragile, pathetic human had transformed them into perfectly functioning gears of her own sick, psychological meat grinder. A primal, deafening roar erupted from the Vorax King. It was not a cry of pain, but a declaration of completely wounded pride. The broodmother hissed violently, forcing her remaining physical strength into her razor-sharp front talons. The Cillian assassin drew its secondary venomous blades. In a totally unprecedented moment of absolute synchronization, the three apex predators abandoned their evolutionary hatred for one another. They united under a single, desperate, raging instinct to utterly obliterate the tiny creature that had stolen their honor. They lunged forward simultaneously, a terrifying convergence of pure, unadulterated death from three separate directions. Amari did not raise her energy blade. She did not assume a defensive stance. She simply reached up to the heavy biometric tracking collar, locked tightly around her neck, and violently ripped the central casing open with her bare hands. She forcefully bypassed the primary biometric sensor and accessed the deeply encrypted military subnet hidden within its core. With a rapid sequence of keystrokes executed on her wrist console, she projected a massive, high-definition holographic display directly into the thick air between her and the charging monsters. The charging beasts instinctively slammed on their internal brakes, halting mere inches from Amari as the glowing blue text of a top-secret Kalan military directive illuminated their furious faces. The holographic data stream was completely undeniable. It was an orbital strike command code, signed directly by Commander Xylar. "You think I am your enemy," Amari stated, her voice slicing through the heavy, tense silence like a surgical scalpel. "Look closely at the data stream. Commander Xylar never intended for me to survive this trial. But more importantly, he never intended for any of you to survive either. You are the apex leaders of your respective species, a constant, nagging threat to the Sovereign Fleet. Xylar knew that sending an entire armada into the Black Nebula would cost him thousands of ships. So, he used a human, the ultimate bait. She pointed sharply at the glowing coordinates blinking on the projection. He knew my presence would disrupt the natural order. He knew you would all converge on my location to claim the easy kill. He did not send me here to hunt you. He sent me here to gather you all into one perfectly tight, highly convenient blast radius. The biometric collar around Amari's neck began to emit a high-pitched, rhythmic warning siren. The red light on its surface shifted from a steady pulse to a frantic, rapid strobe. This is not a simple biometric monitor, Amari explained, staring directly into the terrified eyes of the Vorax King. It is a Class 4 quantum singularity beacon. 5 minutes ago, when the broodmother's psychic network collapsed, it sent a secondary confirmation signal to the fleet. Xylar has just authorized a concentrated orbital bombardment. In exactly 60 seconds, a payload of dark matter torpedoes will rain down on this exact coordinate, instantly vaporizing everything within a 50-mile radius. Your armor will not save you. Your invisibility will not hide you. Your telepathy cannot stop a bomb. The sheer, mind-bending realization crashed over the three monsters, heavier than any physical blow. The absolute rulers of the dead planet had been reduced to pathetic targets in a rigged game. Their survival instincts immediately overrode their wounded pride. The Vorax King lowered his massive claws. The Cillian retracted its blades. The broodmother shrank back, letting out a low, terrified whine. They were mortal enemies. Yet their entire existence now hung precariously on the actions of the very creature they had just tried to kill. Amari calmly reached under the heavy collar. The device was biologically locked to her pulse, rigged to detonate immediately if violently tampered with. But she had already slowed her heart rate to near zero during her fight with the Cillian. Her biological signature was completely untraceable to the machine's primitive sensors. With a sharp, metallic crack, she snapped the heavy ring completely off her neck. She threw the incredibly dangerous beacon onto the ash-covered ground. She immediately grabbed the hyperdrive core components she had used to crush the Vorax King and the neural amplifier she used against the Krell, moving faster than the alien eyes could track. She spliced the raw power cables directly into the beacon's transmission array. She forcibly reversed the polarity of the quantum signal, creating an incredibly dense, localized energy jamming shield that encapsulated the immediate clearing. The frantic red strobe light on the beacon abruptly sputtered and died entirely. The high-pitched warning siren faded into total silence. "I have completely severed the targeting telemetry," Amari announced, standing tall amidst the smoking ruins. "The orbital payload has lost its lock. The missiles will detonate harmlessly in the upper stratosphere. You are alive only because I permit it." The three terrifying monsters stared at the deactivated bomb, then slowly shifted their gaze back up to the small, unarmored human. The power dynamic of the entire galaxy had just violently shifted. Amari had not just defeated them in physical combat. She had completely outsmarted the Sovereign Fleet, exposed the grand manipulation, and ultimately saved their lives from absolute annihilation. The Vorax King was the first to move. The massive beast slowly sank to his knees, pressing his horned forehead completely against the dirt in absolute reverence. The Cillian shadow immediately followed, kneeling smoothly and crossing its arms over its chest in a solemn oath of loyalty. Finally, the colossal Krell broodmother lowered her immense bulk, letting out a deep, rumbling purr of total submission. The most dangerous predators in the known universe now surrounded Amari Arias, trembling not from fear, but from absolute, unquestioning loyalty, silently waiting for their new Supreme Commander to issue her first genuine order. High above the Tartarus sector, the atmosphere inside the Sovereign Fleet Academy's central observation deck was thick with arrogant anticipation. Commander Xylar stood with his hands clasped behind his armored back, a smug, highly satisfied smile spreading across his sharp features. The massive holographic display projected the dead planet below. The telemetry signal from Cadet Arius had vanished completely. To Xylar and the thousands of alien cadets watching from the upper galleries, the sudden silence meant only one thing: the human was dead. "Take note, cadets," Xylar announced, his voice booming clearly through the acoustic amplifiers. "Let this be the final, undeniable proof of humanity's pathetic biological inferiority. They are weak. They are entirely unsuited for the brutal reality of the cosmos. Record her total failure in the official archives." Before the bridge officers could even enter the command, a deafening explosion violently shook the entire orbital station. The massive, reinforced steel blast doors of the main command deck did not merely open. They were physically ripped from their hydraulic hinges, sent crashing heavily onto the pristine, metallic floor. Emergency sirens instantly wailed, bathing the room in frantic red light. The smoke cleared, and the entire academy froze in absolute, mind-numbing disbelief. Amari Arias strolled casually through the shattered entryway. Her uniform was covered in toxic ash and violet alien blood, but her posture was impeccably straight. Flanking her on all sides were not human reinforcements, but the three most terrifying nightmares of the known galaxy: the Vorax King, the Cillian Shadow, and the colossal Krell broodmother squeezed their massive frames onto the observation deck, their mere presence radiating overwhelming, lethal pressure. The armed Academy guards instinctively raised their plasma rifles, their hands shaking violently in sheer terror. But the monsters did not attack. Instead, in absolute unison, the three monstrous warlords collapsed heavily onto the floor, prostrating themselves before the tiny human. To the absolute horror of everyone present, the beasts engaged their rudimentary vocal synthesizers to speak the common tongue of the galactic fleet. "We beg for your absolute mercy, Supreme Commander," the Vorax King rumbled, his voice shaking with genuine fear. "Spare our broods, and we shall be your eternal blades in the dark," the broodmother projected, her telepathic voice echoing loudly in the minds of every single cadet. Xylar stumbled backward, his face entirely drained of its arrogant color. His mind shattered as he realized the impossible truth. These legendary apex predators were not begging the Sovereign Fleet for a truce. They were miserably, pathetically pleading with Amari Arias to spare their entire species from her wrath. Amari ignored the paralyzed commander and walked calmly directly to the central strategy table. She tossed the cracked, heavily modified biometric tracking collar onto the glass surface. With a single, deliberate tap of her finger against the exposed wiring, she uploaded the quantum jamming code directly into the station's mainframe. Every single holographic display in the room flashed bright purple. The automated defense turrets powered down, the station's heavy plasma cannons locked into neutral positions. In less than 2 seconds, Amari had completely paralyzed the entire weapon system of Xylar's impenetrable fortress. "You were utterly wrong, Commander," Amari stated, her voice projecting with cold, absolute authority across the silent deck. "My species does not need impenetrable armor, optical camouflage, or venomous fangs to dominate a battlefield. Those are the tools of primitive animals." She stepped closer to Xylar, forcing the towering alien to look down into her completely fearless eyes. "Intellect, strategy, and the ability to perfectly manipulate the paralyzing fears of your enemies. That is the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. I did not just hunt your targets. I conquered them. And now, I have conquered your station." Xylar looked desperately at the three giant beasts, ready to slaughter everyone in the room at a single nod from the human. The tactical superiority was absolute. He had been outplayed on every single conceivable level. The immense weight of his total defeat crushed his pride into dust. Slowly, his legs gave out. The arrogant Kalan commander dropped heavily to his knees in front of the entire academy. His head bowed in absolute, humiliating surrender. "The fleet is yours," Xylar whispered, utterly broken. Amari walked past him, ascending the short steps to the Supreme Commander's elevated throne. She turned and seated herself gracefully on the imposing chair, her expression cold and completely victorious. The Vorax King, the Cillian assassin, and the Krell broodmother instantly moved into defensive formations at the base of the throne, forming the most terrifying, completely loyal vanguard the galaxy had ever witnessed. Humanity had not just survived the trial. They had just claimed the crown of the universe. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Sci-fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.